Yes, welcome to the pre-show.
As two blokes who talk about music, or do our best to talk about music on this podcast.
Blokes
Two
who
blokes.
talk about music. You spent too much time in London, but go ahead.
Too much time. Is there a connection between the passing of the Queen and the new king and music? Is there a connection to music somehow?
I assume you're going to tell me.
No, I don't know. I'm asking. It's a conversation. This is not planned. I'm just curious. I don't know. Like, it seems everyone has spoken about, like, no matter what podcast.
For those that are not watching the YouTube video, I'm rubbing my brow right at the moment.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out where he's going with this, but go ahead.
Or should we just talk about your T-shirt that you're wearing that has your name plastered hundreds of times across, just so that our guest will remember your name?
It does.
Or is this for me? So Greg is wearing a Greg T-shirt, a Greg's T-shirt.
I am. The T-shirt that you bought me. You brought me back, you bloke from London.
Listen, podcasts are real and podcasts work. You obviously have heard the news yesterday that Adnan Syed got let go from jail after 20 plus years, and many people are looking back at the podcast serial, saying that that played a huge role in where he is and is not today. So that was some amazing news for him, for his family, and I don't know, for podcasters, I think.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts? This won't make it to the pre-show, I don't think.
No. No.
I do want to ask. I do want to ask Michael whether or not he gets paid by the pound. Have you?
Yeah.
Because freaking books are.
You can start off with that question.
Yes, are really heavy.
Yes, that would be our upcoming guest.
Yes. So Michael Barclay, by the way, welcome to the pre-show. Michael Barclay is following Alan Cross. We had Alan Cross on last week.
Yep.
Michael Barclay this week. And the one thing they have in common is that they are two people that they're music historians. Mm-hmm. Michael, I think, focuses almost exclusively, or has, in the three books we have that he's penned, exclusively on Canadian music. And some people know him, some people don't, but almost everybody knows Alan Cross. He's been on the airwaves. He's got even a popular podcast, popular blog. And I think that the music industry, fans owe a debt of gratitude to both of these individuals, as well as many others, for covering music in this country, for informing, for educating us. And I'm really excited to speak with Michael right after speaking with Alan last week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting few years. Sort of that 6-year period starting in 2000 for Canadian music, and I think it's interesting reading this book because it was the time when my kids were starting to listen to popular music, popular Canadian music. So,
okay.
My son was into Alexisonfire before we were.
All right.
We as a family started listening to Billy Talent together. So, it's interesting to read some of the chapters in there in terms of the music that wasn't necessarily from when I was a kid growing up, nor when I was a teenager growing up, but more as my kids started to become more self-aware. I mean, they were always brought up with music, but as they became self-aware of their own musical tastes.
Yeah, absolutely. And without any further ado, let's speak with author and music historian Michael Barclay.
Hi, the following podcast is brought to you by Radical Road Brewery, the best craft beer in the heart of Leslieville. Find them at 1177 Queen Street East. That's Radical Road Brewery.
My name is Michael Barclay. Oh, sorry.
Oh, look, he's already blown it.
Go!
Jesus.
Whenever you're ready.
That's my Nardwuar tableau. My name is Michael Barclay. I write books about Canadian rock and roll music.
Awesome. I should have told you to say the name of our show. I messed up. That's good.
Want me to do it again?
Welcome to the music. There we go.
Who's directing this show?
Greg is. Greg's the man.
No, I'm the audio guy. You're the one that
Just tell me what to do.
No, that was great. That was good.
Perfect.
That was perfect. Okay, welcome. Yes. So my chiropractor has an issue with you. So first of all,
Didn't see that coming.
You cover a decade in this book.
Correct.
And for
Can
those
your listeners at home see that book?
they can't, but those on YouTube might be able to see that this is a 739 page book.
Correct.
Have not been the same.
Have not been the same. 1985 to 1995. Can Rock Resident Renaissance.
Quack.
You wrote us a smaller book, but it's hardcover. That's 482 pages.
I think reading should be a physical feat.
Yes. And then, hold on. Only 6 years, Michael. Only 6 years. And it's like 100 pages a year. 603 pages.
Your chiropractor should be thanking me for giving him
for the
all
business.
Your business. Yeah.
For the business. I know. I think you write about, I think you thank your editor for allowing you to write so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, have you ever, the first thing I thought was, why not write 5 different books or 3 different books?
I proposed that, actually. I did propose that.
Yeah.
Because you and I both know what the market is like, what people's reading habits are like, what the TikTok generation wants. And I was like, is anybody going to want a book this large? I did bring that up with the publisher. I'm like,
yeah,
we could have a linked series of smaller books, or you could have a limited edition book that has everything in it. And then if you only want to read about, broken social scene, you can just buy that chapter or something, or break it into different ebooks. Not that I had any answers. I was just throwing that all on the table, and they're like, no, let's just do one book. So,
fair enough.
But I think there are innovative ways to do that. With Have Not Been the Same, they did spin off the Tragically Hip chapter, the Blue Rodeo chapter, and maybe the Sloan chapter into ebooks that they sell for like $5 or something.
Okay.
So if you are a huge Blue Rodeo fan, and by the way, there is no Blue Rodeo book out there. So if you want the definitive Blue Rodeo story up to 95, you can buy that ebook, and you don't have to do any heavy lifting.
Nice. So I'm assuming, knowing that you wrote the first, maybe I don't know if it was the first, but was it the first Tragically Hip book?
The Never-Ending Present was beat to the punch by a couple of months by essentially a large photo book that I think was commissioned by Indigo. And there's a Vancouver journalist who who did the text for that. Oh, and there's also a quickie ebook by some American guy who writes about 20 ebooks a year.
Oh, wow.
Like he wrote separate books about the stars of 50 Shades of Grey.
Oh,
And then he
All
cranked
right.
out a hip book, and that was the first hip book to ever come out. Now, arguably,
Okay.
is it a real book? It's an ebook, but that really lit a fire under my butt
Yeah.
to do it properly and do it well, and to have a real life book.
Are you working on the Blue Rodeo book?
No,
Okay.
someone should. I mean, I do feel like, especially now, I feel like they're kind of winding down. Greg Keeler's health issues have really taken them off the road for much of the year, and I don't, I'm not sure what an ongoing. I'm not sure what's left in their story per se.
Yeah.
So it would be a good time for one. So, listeners of the world, there you go.
absolutely. I think when we talk about this book that we're discussing today, I did really like the way that you took the years, or took the chapters, and sort of interwove the various bands and the stories. So it was like you jump from AOF into a Billy Talent into Fucked Up, and then back to Billy Talent. So I thought that was very well done, and kept the reading flowing versus one very large 100-page chapter.
I appreciate that, because that's tricky to do as a writer, and you're looking for the segues, and
Mhm.
when you do that, you really underscore the connections between all of these artists, and then that also separates the book from being an encyclopedia. Like, here's 10 pages about this artist, here's 10 pages about that artist, and then it doesn't really form a narrative. So that said, I feel like every chapter is self-contained. So if you don't care at all about those bands you just mentioned, Alexisonfire, etc., you can skip that chapter, and you're not really missing much from the book. And I would say that about anybody else as well. Any other single chapter, if you just decide that's not for me. But my favorite compliments about the book are people who say, I didn't know anything about Artist X, and I totally missed that when it was happening, and I'm reading this now, and it's a really great story.
Yeah.
And either they then go listen to the music and fall in love with it, or they listen to the music and go, that's not for me, but I really enjoyed reading that story. So that's one of my goals, is to at least expose people to this, and hopefully they're drawn to the music.
Yeah. I'm glad you wrote about Peaches, because there was a coworker of mine this past spring that came from the UK to Toronto, and we spent some time together, and she said, I'm going to this festival, I think she said, and I really want to see this Canadian artist play. And I'm thinking, okay, I've got a music podcast, I know Canadian music. And she goes, Peaches, and I go, yeah, really, Canadian? I've never heard of Peaches. And then she goes, yeah. And so I go online, I go, oh yeah. And then you wrote about Peaches in your book. I go, okay, she's someone that I should know
Did any of
about.
it ring a bell, or was that all entirely new to you?
It was all entirely new. All entirely new to me. It was a shock. I'm glad you wrote about Danko Jones.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've only recently discovered him through Instagram and Twitter.
Right, he's quite a lively presence.
Yeah, and I'm like, why did I never hear of this person before? And so
Right.
I'm glad you wrote about him. You talked earlier, Michael, about here's 5 pages on this band or this artist, and you didn't want to write an encyclopedia necessarily, but was there an artist or a band that maybe was the last band that got cut off from this book that didn't make it?
In terms of chronology, in terms of time?
Yeah, in terms of maybe in terms of length of the book, I don't know.
Well, yeah, no, sure. There's a lot of stuff I would have loved to have also have written about, and
Yeah.
some of my favorite artists, but I tried to stick to the thesis as much as I could, which was,
Okay.
this was a transformative time. So a lot of these success stories are unusual, and they're not kind of the traditional, you play the clubs, you get some press, you sign a smaller deal, then you sign a bigger deal, and then you're on radio, and boom. So a lot of this was like, how did this happen? And success stories through file sharing or message boards, or just various methods of your music finding its way overseas and people being really into it. There's a lot of people who only ever really had success in Canada that I didn't write about.
Okay.
So another part of my lens is that everybody in this book would be recognizable to people overseas. Certainly in the niche genres,
Sure.
definitely very few of them are mainstream stars. There's only like 3 people I would say are close to household names. Everyone else, you kind of have to be in that genre of music to know. So that's, there were a lot of people that got left out. And in terms of chronology, like if you mean like people who came just after 2005, 2006.
Yeah, no, I was just curious, whether there was someone you wanted to write about, maybe there was not enough space, or even, you joke about it, I think, in the beginning of your book, where, you were curious if people are going to start coming up to you and saying, hey, you didn't write about my favorite artist, who I thought had a great album, or I went to a great show. Has anyone come to you since April and said, hey, Michael, what the heck?
They're managers.
For which bands?
Well, it's one of the MVPs of the book, who I didn't get a chance to talk to for it, but his name is everywhere, and his name is Chris Taylor, and he is a lawyer, an entertainment lawyer.
Okay.
In the 90s, he was the singer of a reggae band called One, as in the numeral, and then he went into entertainment law, and basically he got pretty much everybody in this book's record deal, or like he helped them maneuver their way around, and of different genres of music. He was just kind of everywhere in the Toronto music scene at that time. And so he got a copy of the book and wrote to me and told me how much he loved it and shared some stories that were great. And then he's like, but you really should have written about Death from Above. And it's true, I should have. They totally fit into all the thesis and the markers of the book. I'm not a fan of that band, so that's one reason I didn't. And another reason is that their success was very quick and very fleeting. And there were elements of their story that were similar to other stories I was telling, of a band like the Unicorns, for example, or I'm just trying to think of others. But at some point when you're writing about all these people, you have to be like, okay, well, where are the unusual stories? And if 5 artists became successful the exact same way, I don't want to tell the same story 5 times. So I have to focus on one. So yeah, there's definitely bands like that kind of got inched out. I think the Stills would be another one who fit into this time frame. Also did quite well internationally. One of my favorites, Great Lake Swimmers, didn't do as well internationally as some of these other acts, but definitely were present and touring the world and had records on labels around the world. So yeah, there's about 10 to a dozen artists I think you could make a good case that should be in this book and are not. But again, as I say in the book, you're already complaining about how much it weighs, so
that's only me. I'm getting old.
Oh yeah,
he is old. I'll give you that. So it's funny you talked about what it was before, and I think of myself as a musician in the late 80s, early 90s, or through the mid 90s. And you're right, that's what it was. I mean, look at Our Lady Peace. Mike Turner played in our band and then went on to start Our Lady Peace. And, you play some gigs, you meet up with Arnold Lanny, you would do some demos and you get picked up and away you go. And there's a lot of other stories like that back then too. It is very different. And one of the things that I really dug in the book, and again, I'm probably going to focus on this chapter more than any for me personally, but is just the story of the sort of DIY. You mentioned about message boards, sort of guerrilla tactics that Joel Carrier and Dallas and Alexisonfire used. And I again, for anybody that hasn't read the book yet, I'd love for you to just sort of talk about that and sort of, what they did at that time to really, break the mold of how you make it.
Yeah, I mean, they had some traditional methods as well. Like they would, just flyer outside other bands' shows, or they say, "What's your favorite band?" And someone would say something. They're like, "Well, we're that band, like that band, but heavier." Just very word of mouth hype. And then, but also again, this is the dawn of message boards, and that's really, talk about niche communities. That's the point of a message board, right? Like, I am the only person I know who is into X. and here I have found all the other people who are into X. It could be the LA punk band I'm talking about. It could be the algebraic number. And Joel Carrier of Dine Alone Records really kind of tapped into that scene, particularly in the Golden Horseshoe area, St. Catharines, Niagara, Hamilton, and into Buffalo. And Alexisonfire were playing all these basement shows everywhere, and all these kids were super into it. And the band themselves were still in high school. They were literally kids. And then they had this situation where they somehow muscled they first of all, they got a video grant, and they made an amazing looking video. Very well shot, very beautiful looking, in the mode of some Radiohead videos or this Swedish band called Refused that they really liked. And then they got into Much Music, but Much Music did not want to play it. And they somehow twisted their arm to put it on the vote-in show. And usually the people who win the vote-in show are Justin Timberlake and Britney Spears and a lot of the bubblegum stuff at that time. And they tap into message board culture, and then all these kids vote for it, and suddenly it beats Justin Timberlake, and they're like, "What just happened?" And then George Stroumboulopoulos works at Much Music, and he happened to be at that band's first Toronto show and loved them, bought a T-shirt, so they have an in there, a big fan, and they're one of kind of the last bands. I find them interesting because they're one of the last bands to be broke by Much Music. Right, because shortly after that time period, Much Music gets increasingly irrelevant and is not really what it was in the 80s and 90s, which was massive. Cannot underestimate the importance of Much Music, especially for hip hop in this country. I think that hip hop in this country would not exist without Much Music because radio wasn't going to go anywhere near it. And that's also true of a lot of aggressive music. So they're one of the last bands that Much Music helps, and at the same time, they've got this groundswell of online support. And then they become one of the biggest bands of that decade. And they weren't a band that I followed. It's not my genre of music, and I'm 10 years too old for it. But people 10 years younger than me, like, that is the band of their generation. That is the Tragically Hip of that generation, right? On a variety of levels, really. And my friend Sam Sutherland, with whom I worked at Exclaim magazine, said, people like poop their pants about the success of Broken Social Scene or like all these other arts and crafts acts or other indie acts, but Alexisonfire actually had #1 records in Canada. Like, they sold so many. They were a huge mainstream band while existing outside the mainstream. And because of their genre of music, I don't think they get respect for that. I think they do now, actually, but I think for a long time they didn't, from schmucks like me who didn't really understand the importance of what was happening there.
Well, it's funny because if you're 10 years too old, I'm probably then 20 years too old. And during the pre-show, we were actually talking about it because Alexisonfire is actually a band that how old's my son now? Just 27, I guess. My 27-year-old son was the one that brought, and again, my kids always grew up around music. They listened to, I always played the Salads and, all the local buds that we all hung out with, right? So actually, that was even after me, but anyway, it doesn't matter. But the point is my kids grew up with all the sort of local music, the bands and stuff, and Alexisonfire was really my son's growing up moment as a young kid, who then brought the music back to us, and we all went, wow, like, this is pretty incredible stuff. So
he was 12 years old 15 years ago. That makes total sense.
Yeah. And to him, it was, same with Billy Talent. Now, well, not same as much as Billy Talent. We were all into Billy Talent, but, and again, we cover that off in the book. But yeah, it's, we had Alan Cross on last week, and one of the things he was talking about was people don't sit down and listen to music together anymore. And I said to him, well, I will tell you, as a family that grew up with music, we love to do that. So we've always, even to this day, when they're 27, they're coming in, and my son's bringing in like Lawrence, the band Lawrence, and going, you guys need to sit down and listen to Lawrence. And then next thing you know, we're going to the show at History. Anyway,
that's great. I mean, a lot of families have 4 sets of headphones in the car, and nobody's listening to anything together.
Yeah.
And then kids don't hear their parents' music, and parents don't hear their kids' music, and then there's this disconnect where it's no longer something that brings people together.
Absolutely. One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about from the book also is So you mentioned Broken Social Scene. When Brandon was in Head or H Head, depending on however you want to say it, they were from Durham. We were from Durham. We played a lot of shows together. And then, Brandon went on with Kevin and everybody to start Broken Social Scene. But one of the things I found really interesting in the book was to dive deeper into sort of there was such a cross-pollination of bands during that time. And again, I think that's part when you talk about sort of outside of the normal way of doing things, with Metric and Deers and other bands. It was just like this sort of, by divine right, like they all just sort of like everybody just sort of not intermingled, but you know what I mean? Like there was that cross-pollination. Can you talk a bit more about that at that time in the scene?
I mean, I think it's not uncommon really in any city, in any scene, but I think what made that time special is that the end of the 90s, it did kind of feel like the bottom dropped out of a lot of things. And that kind of goal of the big record deal and the big success just didn't seem feasible or even desirable because everybody knew somebody who'd been burned somehow. Yeah. So it really was this all for one for all. Let's just do it. Let's not worry about making big shiny pop songs. Like, let's just mess around and see what happens. And you come over to my basement, we'll throw something down and I'll show up at your gig next week. We'll do something. It was a time of like Hayden had this Hardwood Wednesdays songwriter series. Then Jason Collette had his Radio Mondays, kind of more of a folk festival workshop atmosphere, but not folk music, like with many different genres of music. Including Peaches, who apparently freaked a lot of people out at one songwriters workshop. So that was really
wait. Hold on, Michael. What happened at this workshop? What did you hear happen?
Well, it was a bunch of acoustic guitar playing singer-songwriter types, which she was more familiar with, or quite familiar with, because she started out in kind of like an Indigo Girls style duo. But she shows up with her synth / drum machine and does her rather raunchy act, and then everyone else is just horrified. This is not Pete Seeger, and then she got some I think a review in Now magazine that dismissively referred to it as like a one woman throwdown, and then we got back to the real music. Which I think she took as a badge of honor. That she had offended that kind of crowd.
That's a punk ethos.
And then in the case of Peaches, where she was like, nobody in Toronto is really getting what I'm doing, or very, very, very few people are doing. So I'm just going to go to Berlin and get, an apartment twice the size for the same amount of rent, and just tapped into what was happening there. And she's still beloved in Berlin. I was in Berlin in the spring and talking to this veteran music journalist and showing him the back of the book and who's in the book, and he's going through. He's like, yep. And, oh, Peaches is our mascot here. Like, she's like our town mascot.
Wow.
So all of which is to say that there was that kind of lowered expectation and this idea that anything can happen, and that was the groundswell of creativity that I think really fueled this moment. Whereas when you get to people that say, why didn't you write about the whole decade? And it's like, well, later, after these people became successful, particularly Arcade Fire, which kind of capped that era on building on the groundswell of everything that had happened, then it wasn't unusual anymore. And then that expectation comes back in, right? Then people are like, oh yeah, if I just get my song on this blog, or then it becomes a bit more rote and formula. But these 6 years was the Wild West. This was like, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. Michael, I think if we had spoken this spring, our discussion and fandom of Arcade Fire would have had we would have been speaking differently. Certainly. Now that we're speaking in mid to late September, almost 4 weeks since news broke of Win Butler's extracurricular activities, this is a different Arcade Fire conversation. I remember seeing your tweet, and I assumed it was about Arcade Fire and Win Butler, but I wasn't 100% sure. But then after going through the book, I go, oh, this is 100%. You're not talking about just some person that happens to be a friend. You're actually talking about some person that we all know who, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but seemingly was a very good friend of yours.
No, I wouldn't say that. We were very
okay.
We were very friendly. When I lived in Montreal, I only knew 2 people when I moved there that I wasn't working with, and because I moved there for a job, and one of them had just joined Arcade Fire, and that was Tim Kingsbury. So I got to know that whole band like as that was
Fair
just
enough.
taking like while they were making the record, and there were dinners and there were out of town trips, and I would never say I knew Win extremely well. He's a hard person to get to know well, but I do know other people in that band quite well.
Yeah.
I mean, that news really rattled me. It was really gross. I couldn't think about anything else for about a week. And it's an interesting time to talk about this book now in different ways than the spring.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm only kind of just beginning to do that because after that news broke, I quite honestly didn't want to talk about the book.
I can imagine.
Not that week. It just didn't. It's not something I wanted to promote or be in front of a microphone talking about.
Yeah.
Quite honestly, while writing the book, I was terrified something like this would happen. I had no idea about whom. But in this day and age.
Oh, just like in general, like
in general. Yeah. I'm writing about 42 different artists.
Yeah.
What are the chances that one of them will get Me Too'd, will be QAnon, will be anti-vaxxer, will be a Russian stooge? Like, take your pick. Like, chances are high that somewhere in this pool of people, something like that is going to happen.
Yeah.
It did. So, I've had a lot of conversations with people about how to entirely selfishly. I mean, there's lots of things we could talk about here, but entirely selfishly about this book and this narrative. This book is about 42 different people, or it's 42 different acts, many of which are bands with many people. Arcade Fire are definitely a through line, and they kind of conclude the book because I feel like their success really was the cap on that era. I stopped their story in 2006 or 5, really. I mean, a lot of people, everybody in the book, I didn't want to tell everybody's whole story. So generally, I could stop it at some point and then say, everyone lived happily ever after. Which in general they did. But so this book is not about Arcade Fire's entire history. This is about the moment they became successful.
Yeah.
And the scene from which they became successful. So I would hope that people are still able to read this book and take away all the good parts. And we can wrestle about how you feel about it now. I'm not going to get into that on a microphone, but there's many different ways one can feel. And some people are not phased at all. And some people are extremely phased and want to burn their records.
Yeah.
So I think this book is about that moment.
What made you more comfortable speaking about it now? Like maybe you took like a self, you sort of said, I'm not talking about this for the next little while, but why are you more comfortable now speaking about it?
Because my friend Kareem had me in his calendar for September 20th. And
go ahead.
I wasn't, this news broke at the fall, and I was like, yeah, I should start booking some events and hustle the book a bit. Because I've also been very, COVID shy, and I didn't want to host super spreader events while releasing a book. So I only had 2 things on my calendar, and one was in Hamilton last weekend, and one is in Toronto this coming Saturday, September 24th. If you're listening, and that date hasn't passed yet. I'm at Harbourfront at 4:30 with Cadence Weapon, part of the Toronto International Festival of Authors. So I had 3 things on my calendar, which was you and 2 live events. So, yeah, I am seeing how this evolves as I talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt.
I would talk to. Sorry, go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
I was going to say, changing a bit of subject here, but when you talk about you didn't carry on the story, again, I go back to the chapter that I really honed in on. What I loved in the book was you actually carried on the story about Billy Talent and Aaron with his MS and Jordan from Alexisonfire jumping on the kit to support Aaron and the band through the album, through the tour. And I've got goosebumps because I remember Billy Talent leaving the stage, and I think I leaned down. This is almost like an MC5 when Dave Grohl showed up, and my son went, "Dad, I think Dave Grohl's on stage." I leaned down to grab a beer, and my wife said, "I think Alexisonfire just hit the stage," and I'm like, "What?" And they did that encore, and you covered that. So I thought that was really nice. I know you didn't talk about a lot of bands, but I thought that was a really nice way to sort of close that section around Billy Talent out by covering that.
Well, it really underscores their connection, and that's why it's in there. Like it was very relevant to the point I was trying to make. Yeah. There's very few, if any, events after 2010 that I even mentioned in the book. But Alexisonfire was, their story kind of did extend. It felt important to kind of cover it up to their initial split, to at least get that far. Whereas with a band like Effed Up, it was there was no real drama or that I'm aware of, which I feel is an important qualifier I have to keep adding now. There was no other drama that I was aware of in the rest of their career. There was no split. There was no hiatus. But even their story extends a bit, just because they didn't really break until 2008, 2009. So even though they're quite active in the time period I'm writing about, they don't actually put out their first full-length record till 2006. Which, you could argue that, well, they shouldn't be in the book because they're outside the time frame, but they're extremely active in those first 5 years. They already have an international reputation based on a series of singles. They definitely fit in thematically with everything else in the book. And so, that chapter in particular has some stories that extend beyond my self-imposed deadline, just because it really made narrative sense to talk about that. Whereas a lot of other people, there's not a large narrative shift in their story. But those people, there definitely is, and it's this really poetic kind of coming together with those two bands.
Yeah, it was beautiful. I mean, it was an amazing, not expected event, but it was a beautiful event.
Yeah,
for sure.
I remember, I think high school, going into university. All my friends making fun of me that I would listen to this loud music that they claimed you couldn't dance to.
And he's talking about Roger Whittaker, by the way.
And I would make fun of them listening to like Diamond Girl. Ooh, oh, I would make fun of the music and the lyrics that they would listen to. But there was a point in time not too long ago when I felt, I better not tell anybody that I like a few songs from this band called Nickelback, because it seems if you like Nickelback, you're not cool anymore, because they're the rock band that everybody loves to hate. It is interesting
and hates to love, but go ahead.
Hates to love. Yeah, true. It is curious that the shortest chapter in this book is the book on Nickelback. Why are they so successful is my first question. What are your thoughts on their success, and why apparently they are so loved?
You're asking me to say nice things about a band that I do hate.
Oh, geez.
And I don't hate them because I'm trying to appear cool.
Yes.
I have a genuine, visceral, physical reaction to that music.
Okay.
But I also, it's subjective, and I'm not going to knock somebody for liking them. I have, I don't like Creed, and I don't even like Pearl Jam, Kareem. So I am not the target demo for Nickelback musically. But I have to admit I was on another podcast where they were kind of jukeboxing me and like playing songs from artists in the book, and then I would talk about them.
Yeah.
And they sprung How You Remind Me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I have to admit, like, just entirely objectively, while suppressing my own vomit, this is an extremely well-written, well-crafted pop song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The piccolo snare kind of drives me nuts, that 90s thing. Like, but of course, it's a catchy song. And that's why it's so popular. And his other songs are incredibly catchy. And they, if you do like that kind of hard rock sung by constipated men, you will love this band. So that's why they're popular. Do I need to explain this?
I was going to ask, why are they so hated? But I don't want your answer.
Why are they so hated? Oh, that's a whole other sociological question involving class, involving
class.
Sure.
I haven't heard that before.
Well, I think it's there's like an archetype, especially with hard rock or with mainstream country music or with hip hop for that matter.
Yeah.
People associate certain music with a certain class of people, often a certain ethnicity of people that it's easy to look down on. So again, depending on where you're coming from,
sure.
The last thing that it seems to be okay to hate are working class white people, maybe even from Alberta. So it's, and and the same is true of like mainstream country music. Like it's so I think there's that element of it, and that goes back to people who used to hate Bruce Springsteen until they actually listened to his songs and realized how amazing he is. Or take your pick of like popular so-called working class rock stars. Like there's a long history of scorn heaped upon people like that. And so the rest of my book is largely music for bookish campus radio nerds who are really into low self-esteem music, right? Present company included. I totally own up to that. And if you're really into low self-esteem music, you're going to hate Nickelback.
Yeah.
So that's what it is. And I don't spend a lot of time on them in the book. I don't want to give anyone who hasn't read the book, I don't want to give that impression that I'm equating Nickelback as being just as awesome as Arcade Fire or something. But
you have to read the book to make sure you're not.
Yeah. It's amazing how much those 700 words in this book have generated in conversation. But it's but they were the biggest Canadian artists of that time. Right?
Yeah,
they're one of the biggest artists, period, of that time. They were more popular than Destiny's Child during that decade. So, and it would be ignorant of me to write a book about Canadian music and dare not speak their name. No, we should speak their name. We should talk about it.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I don't shy away from my own feelings about it, but I have Danko Jones defending them. I have Corb Lund defending them and saying, people hate them because they're easy to hate and people love to hate them. That's why they hate them. Yeah. And Corb Lund makes the excellent point. He's like, when I grew up, I was told that the band Kiss was garbage and juvenile and stupid and the death of rock and roll, but I loved my Kiss records when I was a kid. And he's like, I suspect that a lot of people in 20 years are going to love their Nickelback records unapologetically for the exact same reason. I also hate Kiss, so I feel like I'm at least consistent. But lots of people love Kiss, and Kiss went from being scorned and just music for kids' lunchboxes to like, I've never used the word respectable, but they are what they are. They're a major cultural force, and they won in the end. They won at the time, and they won now, and Nickelback's in the same position.
I think that's essentially, I think, the point Danko made in the book, which is, who am I to fault them for their success and what they've done? Like, maybe I hate them at the time, but looking back now, it's like they did something incredible.
Well, he opened for them too, right? So
and he was saying they treated us amazing.
Yeah.
It's like I spent 10 years playing clubs that smell like piss, and it's like, And now I have a chance to play really great, huge halls, opening for a big band, and get treated well. And people are gonna tell me that's not cool. It's like, screw you. Like, I'd like to be treated well for a change.
Yeah.
But all of this also brings up just the timing of this book. 20 years after a lot of this stuff happened, and interviewing people. There is a maturity, and a lot of the kind of petty, juvenile grudges people had in their 20s has kind of evaporated. People are like, everybody has that when you're 20s, and you play with another band, and you're like, we're gonna blow them off the stage, and then the longer you're in the business, if you're strong enough to continue to be in the business, because it sure ain't easy, you gain real empathy for your fellow tradeswomen, people still doing it. You all have this weird thing in common. You've stuck with this artistic pursuit, and I think a lot of the snobbery kind of melts away. And there's a couple people in the book. Danko is one. Nick Thorburn of the Unicorns is another. Where it's like, you can be a dick up until about you're 25, and then after that, it's just not a good look. Like, then you just really are a dick. Whereas, like, it's kind of funny before the age of 25.
It's interesting. You didn't, Danko Jones talks about, somebody from Broken Social Scene. I'm going to assume it's his former roommate. But
no, he specifies it wasn't his former roommate. So.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yeah.
Who slagged him, and he said just F you. But like, you don't quote any artist who says that they don't like them. Was that on purpose?
Don't like who? Nickelback or Danko?
Nickelback.
Why would I? Everybody knows who hates Nickelback.
I don't know. Well, I don't know. Is it public? No, I don't know.
Well, first of all, he didn't tell me, and I don't think it mattered. It's symbolic. It's symbolic.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't need to out people as Nickelback.
Other than yourself.
Other than myself. My name's on the cover. I have to own that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. When you write about Danko Jones, he sounds like one of the happiest people in music.
I don't know if I go that far.
Well, he sounds hot, like for someone who had to go overseas, and not just down in the States, but literally overseas to become successful. He sounds comfortable in his own skin. He understands who he is, and he understands who he isn't. And he's, of course, I'm sure he would want way more success and more Nickelback type tours. But he sounds like, this is who I am, and I'm excited about it. I'm happy about it, and F you if you don't like me.
He still has #1 radio signals in Germany, so it's like
that's nuts.
Complaining.
Yeah.
And he was someone else who, again, I don't know if you can tell from this conversation, but I'm not really a hard rock guy. So
no Pearl Jam, no Nickelback, no Kiss.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, low self-esteem music. That's my advice. I would not say I'm a Danko Jones fan. I appreciate his music a lot, though. I appreciate his commitment to an aesthetic. He's always had a great band. His bass player and various drummers over the years have been awesome. He's very entertaining to go see live. He's not someone whose records I'd ever play. And I, when I was initially outlining this book, I wasn't sure if he would be in it. I was thought, just thinking of my own personal taste, it's like, I don't know. And then the more I learned about him, and especially after talking to him, he's an amazing, you need to talk to him. He's a great interview.
Yeah.
We've been trying. If you can pull any strings, we have been trying to get Danko. Kareem posts on Twitter about once every 3 days begging Danko to come on our show. Maybe not.
Well, he's a busy guy. But no, I mean, just getting to know him through interviewing him, I really like the guy a lot, and he's got much more interesting and wide musical taste than he's given credit for. And again, with a lot of people who I decided to include in the book, it was really their story that attracted me. And it's a story that a lot of Canadians don't know. I've spent a surprising amount of time talking about Danko Jones in interviews for this book, which I did not anticipate. And I think that's because it's very surprising for a lot of people because they don't know that. And that's, speaking broadly, a lot of people don't know, again, that Peaches is so big in Berlin,
Mhm.
that Danko's so big in Sweden, that the Weaker Thans were so big in Germany, that Alexisonfire does well in Australia. Like
Billy Talent plays massive shows in Europe, headlining festivals.
Huge, bigger than
yeah.
Saga ever did,
Yeah.
if you know anything about that history.
Oh, yeah.
And that's, going back to our Tragically Hip conversation a couple of years ago, we Canadians measure success by the States, and that's not the measure of success. Obviously, that's the holy grail. Very few people get to do that. The people who do often sacrifice a lot. I talk a lot about how Terry McBride managed Bare Naked Ladies and Sarah McLachlan, who basically sacrificed 2 or 3 years of their lives only touring the States, not seeing their family, anybody, just playing every crappy backyard radio barbecue. It is a major investment to break the States, and a lot of it comes down to luck too. So as Canadians, we have this perception that if my American friends don't know this band, they must be terrible, or they must have failed. And there are all these other metrics that we're not looking at, and a lot of bands in this book became very successful, not necessarily in the States. For a while, it looked like the States wouldn't work out for Feist. She was doing very well in Europe, very well in Canada, and if it wasn't for that iPod ad, maybe the States would not have happened for her. But she still had these other avenues open to her, and she wouldn't have been a failure if she didn't make it in the States. Or even Alexisonfire. Again, there's many parallels with the hip and Alexisonfire, and the States is not. My understanding is it's not awesome for them. In fact, City and Color does much better in the States than Alexisonfire. But again, they don't need to, because they can play South America, they can play Europe, they can play Australia, and they play stadiums across Canada. So, one of many things I hope people take away from this book is that, the States is not the be all and end all. And another thing about this period of time is that it was a time when a lot of people could succeed in somewhat narrow niches. A band like Caribou makes music that will never, ever, 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 ever get played on Canadian radio. That's just not what Canadian radio does. It doesn't take anything away from his music. He's incredible, and he's innovative, and he's interesting, and he's also an amazing, amazing guy to talk to. And he just slowly built up his niche audience over years. And without a radio hit or whatever, he plays large venues all around the world. And this was a time when that thinking really shifted, that the only way to be successful is to have a radio hit and to break the States. This meant there's a whole bunch of different ways to make it, and when there's a whole bunch of different ways to make it, people who make really weird, interesting music can succeed around the world.
Perfect segue-ish, because who I really enjoyed learning the backstory of, that I wasn't aware of, aside from reading the book, outside of reading the book, Chili Gonzalez. And people don't realize he's gone on to win Grammys with Random Access Memories with Daft Punk and so many massive things that you don't necessarily know it's him because he's on the liner notes is with Chili Gonzalez, right?
But
within, I think it was. No, but who does that anymore? but I really I was hoping you could tell a bit of that story in terms of Chili Gonzalez at that time, because again, he's probably one of the least known, biggest people that's covered in the book from that earlier period of time.
Yeah, so very similar to Peaches. Well, it's actually the same story as Peaches. So they went to Europe together, and so he had a major label deal in Canada, and it went totally bust. He did very well kind of on Queen Street, and then he got signed to Warner, and then nothing happened at all. And he made the situation worse by demanding a lot of things. And the first single off his second major label record had the really popular, accessible title of "Making a Jew Cry," which you want to kill your
career.
Jason Beck himself is Jewish. I should clarify this.
Yes,
but if you don't know that, you're not going to play that song, and you're probably not going to play that song. So and his the one thing that anybody needs to know about Chili Gonzalez is that he has an enormous ego. And he freely admits that, and he talks about it in the ways in which he wrestles with it all the time. So he loses his deal, and he takes his ego and goes to Europe and says, let's just, I tried to make this very well-crafted, high musicianship music, failed. I'm just going to rap over crappy electro beats and act like a total buffoon and see where that gets me. Lo and behold, it got him very far. And he became a sensation in Berlin and kind of surrounding areas as this kind of buffoon character. And then during the show, he would suddenly sit down at a piano and start playing like sonatas or something. And people would be like, what? This total jackass can slay on the piano? So his whole career was about like subverting expectations. And then one thing leads to another. And then he ends up working with this French producer who's doing stuff with Jane Birkin and Charles Aznavour and all these kind of French greats. And out of that, he finagles a deal for his friend Leslie Feist, and they make the album Let It Die together. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge success in France, even before it's a success here at home. And then one thing leads to another, and then, he becomes this kind of behind-the-scenes figure, helping out a lot of people. Not helping out his friend Peaches, not because she doesn't want it, but because she's capable of doing it herself. And there's a lot of sexist assumptions that made all of Peaches' beats, which is not true. She did that all herself. But anyway, those three are all peas in a pod, and that's something people don't know about Leslie Feist, because people have this image of what Leslie is and the kind of music she makes. And if you're not that familiar with Leslie, you might think she makes, nice, light, pleasant, wispy pop songs that your mom likes. But she used to be on stage with Peaches in a pretty raunchy act, where her stage name was Bitch Lap Lap. And and so I didn't tell Feist's story in the context of Broken Social Scene, where a lot of people think it would be. Yeah. Instead, I told it alongside Peaches and Gonzalez, because that's really where she belongs, because those two people are instrumental, key reasons why she has the career that she does. Not Broken Social Scene. That's, if anything, she helped Broken Social Scene, not the other way around.
That's really interesting, and that's something that people wouldn't know about Leslie Feist, is that part of her career outside of her solo and her work with Broken Social Scene. That being said, and maybe some of the stuff you learned about Danko Jones outside of those, and outside of the things that we've spoken about, was there a story or a musician story or a band story that really opened your eyes, or when it got told to, or when you discovered it, you did not know before?
Usually with stuff that I wasn't familiar with. So again, back to all the hard rock music I never listened to. A lot of that was news to me.
Okay.
And also, there's a hip hop chapter in this book, which not a lot of people talk about. But
that was Greg's, by the way, just to clarify, that was Greg's homework. He was supposed to read the hip hop chapters.
Greg,
well, he hasn't asked a question.
But we were going to talk about Socrates, right?
Socrates.
No, Socrates. Socrates. Okay, so I got to set this up. It's his 100, but we're not doing Welcome to Music at this point. It's just Welcome with Kareem. It's his 100th episode. He's got Maestro. We're up above Betty's in the lounge or the house apartment space or whatever up there.
I was there.
And he says to Maestro, "So can you talk about Socrates?" And Maestro looked at him like, "You are a..."
But he stayed. Yes. He had a laugh.
Yeah, I'm surprised he didn't get up and leave at that point. But it was so to this day we bust him on Socrates all the time. Sorry, I digress.
Maestro, where are you going? Maestro, come back.
Maestro.
All right, kids. Perfect. Let's settle down. Settle down. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Michael. Go ahead.
Oh, so there's actually zero connection between. No, that's not true. Chaos. There's crossover with Chaos and Broken Social Scene. Other than that, there's very little connection with the hip hop scene and everybody else I talk about. But it would be negligent of me not to talk about hip hop. And my initial thought going into this was, hip hop in Canada is always at least 10 years behind the rest of the industry, if not 20, in terms of acceptance, in terms of infrastructure. There's just so many barriers to hip hop being successful in Canada, which is far less true now in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But so I thought, well, I'm talking about all these other people becoming successful. Maybe I'll end up talking about why hip hop didn't break before Drake. Because my understanding as a fan and a Torontonian was that, Cardinal was this really hardworking guy. He was kind of the scene. He coined the term T-Dot. I always kept hearing these things about how things weren't going great for him. Like he had a record that got lost in corporate shuffle and all this stuff and got buried and all these kind of false starts. I thought maybe I'll write about that. And just to illustrate like how it took time for hip hop to catch up to everybody else in terms of industry support. And then what I learned was that that all that stuff about Cardinal is true, and that like he was doing well here. He could have signed to a Canadian label, but he was like, "Why? They're literally offering me peanuts. Like it's not worth it." And then he signs to an American label, gets a bunch of money, but then they totally bury his record, and it never comes out.
Mm-hmm.
But he was like, he was on this pop single by a Scottish pop band that was an international hit. Years later, of course, he has the big international hit with Akon. And he's well known and well respected, and he was like touring with the Roots, and he was like doing all this other stuff. And people in America definitely know who he is. People who love the band The Clips, which was a kind of a Neptunes associated group, Pusha T, they know Cardinal. He is on Rihanna's first record. Like he did have all this success that I didn't know as a Torontonian, and that was news to me. And also someone like Vancouver's Swollen Members. I didn't realize what an independent success story they were. Like they were literally those guys selling records out of the trunk of their car, up and down the West Coast from California to Vancouver, and doing very, very, very well. And by the time they had their Much Music video hit and stuff, like they almost didn't need that because they were already doing so well. And then they also don't get a lot of credit in the evolution of hip hop in Canada because they're from Vancouver. The Rascals barely get the credit. People talk about Northern Touch. They talk about Cardinal and Choclair and everybody else. And it's almost like people forget that, no, that's actually a Rascals track that all those people are on. So I feel like Vancouver gets left out of Canadian hip hop history, which is largely written by Torontonians. And Swollen Members, again, there's an artist, not my favorite band in the world. But I think they really deserve a lot of respect for how they built their career and their success and their independent approach to Canadian music.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Little known fact: my first marriage, not my current marriage, my first marriage was at Cardinal Offichal's house. Now, it wasn't his house at the time.
Oh.
My uncle and aunt had 15 acres, I won't say where, along a river and northwest. And they sold to Cardinal, and they said he was the nicest guy, and they loved him. They loved his wife, and said he was just salt of the earth. So I wasn't actually married at Cardinal's house, but the house I was married at
is now.
Yeah. I got to drop names when I can, right?
Speaking of names, Michael, I know you want to ask a question about Greg's shirt.
This being an audio form, I wasn't going to bring up any visuals, but he is wearing a shirt with the word Greg's all over it.
Yeah. Like, who's got a bigger head in the music business? Greg or Chili Gonzalez? Like, what are your... Like, would Chili wear a shirt that said Chili on it? Is what I'm
probably.
Yeah, he probably would. Yeah, or he'd wear a bathrobe. He'd wear a bathrobe with...
He would wear a fair. Was last night was the Polaris Music Award, I believe?
It was, yeah.
Let's talk about the future of music very quickly. I know you tend to pick winners.
I don't actually. I counted the other day. I've picked 6 out of 17. This was the 17th Polaris Award.
Yeah.
I've only made correct predictions 6 times.
Did you pick correctly last night?
No, I did not.
Oh, who did you pick?
You know what? I don't even know if I did pick, because I found this year full of wild cards.
Mhm.
Do you have an official vote, by the way, Michael?
Not on who wins. I have a vote on the lists.
Okay.
So everybody on the jury votes on the long list, and because you can vote for anything, and then they pick the top ones to be the long list, and then to vote for the short list, you're only allowed to pick from the long list.
Okay.
So every year a different group of 11 people pick the winner.
Okay.
So I was on the jury the year that Feist won in 2013, I believe.
Yeah.
For her album Metals, which has aged very well. Still love that record. So yeah, I was not responsible for picking the win. My favorite on that list was the Snotty Nose Rez Kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love that record a lot.
Yep.
Love that band a lot. But I also quite like the winner, Pierre Quenders from Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't love this record. Like I think it's a nice record. It's a good record. It's a deserving record. It's not a record I love, so I didn't predict that it would win. But I'm very happy for him because he's a fascinating guy and very interesting guy. And so yeah, more power to him.
What are your thoughts on the future of Canadian music based on the past winners that we've seen so far not so far, but over the past few years?
Well, it's been a really interesting shift. It's been all R&B or hip hop for the last 4 or 5 years, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Although Backwash is arguably more metal industrial than hip hop, although they identify as a rapper. So, but Cadence Weapon, Hawaii Mighty.
Yeah.
Who was before that? Was Lido before that?
I can't remember that far back. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been so that's been a shift, and but for me, it's not always about the winner. It is about like who's on the list. And what I like about Polaris is it does show how interesting and diverse a lot of Canadian music is. Yeah. Like it's not just a bunch of indie rock. It's not just a bunch of hip hop or Drake sound-alikes. It's not just X or it's not just Y. It's there's really a lot of interesting things on there. So you have someone more jazzy like Charlotte Day Wilson this year. You have kind of a straight up grunge band with Umbigazi. You have kind of like old school 70s singer-songwriter rock with Kelly McMichael. More experimental stuff with Uri. Like, yeah, it's really all over the place. And that's what I love about that prize. The Junos is what it is. The Junos are very commercial, and I think there's totally a place for that. And it might not always be my thing, but we need that too. You know, we need the Shawn Mendes of the world. We need the Weekends, obviously, and Michael Bublé's and whatever else, the Jan Ardens. Like that's what I love about all that stuff is there's space for all of it to exist. Whereas when I was growing up, it was like the Junos are bust. And if something wasn't nominated for a Juno, it got totally ignored and left out of history. And now, I mean, frankly, I think there should be even more. I mean, there's several large book prizes in Canada. I'm sure there could be more music prizes. I mean, the ECMAs on the East Coast hold a lot of weight out there, you know, and there's also Western Canadian awards. As a Torontonian, I have no idea who wins those awards, but I'm very glad they exist and that they recognize those regional scenes, you know, because it's near impossible to survive as a Canadian musician these days. So, you know, we need all the recognition we can get. And that includes telling the history and telling different histories and not just the histories of, you know, Joni Mitchell or Rush or Bryan Adams or Celine Dion. Like, there's always more. There is always, always, always more when you look. And that's when you find the Jackie Shanes or the Willie Dunns or whoever else, like kind of people rescued from the dustbins of history that only a couple of historians know about, and then get treated to a nice reissue. And, you know, I'm really hoping Lillian Allen has her moment sometime soon. You know, like there's always, Mary Margaret O'Hara continues to inspire people. People still discover that record. And I just would like young Canadians to know that history and not just think that Canadian music is just the same 9 or 10 artists and that it all sounds the same.
Absolutely. And Michael,
that's so good.
And Michael, as I said on Twitter yesterday, whether it's people like Alan Cross or yourself, or even, other people like, we've had Jason Schneider on as well.
Dave McPherson.
Yep.
Yeah, these are, you are part of the reason, or you are one of the few people in Canada who are chronicling, are telling stories about music, and people can discover, brand new artists that have been around for decades, but to them they're brand new. And I think that is one of the reasons why, your book, Hearts on Fire, is amazing, because even for people like Greg and myself, who think we know everything about music, discover Greg more than me, are excited to discover even artists we know, but, discover their stories.
Yeah.
So thank you for writing this book. Greg, you wanted to finish off?
It's exactly what I was going to say. The exact same thing. That's exactly where I was going. So,
yeah.
Well, I thank you for all of that. And I will add, you should really have Nick Jennings on this show, who wrote a great book called Before the Gold Rush, which was a big inspiration for me. It was about the Yorkville scene of the 60s. And that was kind of the first book I read that took Canadian music history very seriously. Came out in the mid-90s. You're writing it down, Kareem. That's very good. Nicholas
Greg,
Jennings.
This is called research. Nick Jennings.
And he also wrote a Lightfoot biography a couple of years ago. I'm also aware of 2 other Canadian music books in the works that I'm very excited about. One, I've been waiting for literally more than 20 years for the author to do it. I'm told they're finally finishing it. I won't jinx it by telling you what it is, but it's a very genre-specific, important Canadian work. And the other book I'm aware of is set in the same time period as mine, and it's about a lot of music I hate, but a lot of music that's very popular.
Hard rock.
Means a lot to that generation of young people from that time period. And that book is also being written, so I'm excited that there are more books being written, because part of the reason I want my books to exist is to inspire other people to write their own, either because they love what I do so much, or because they hate what I do so much and they think, damn it, I can do a lot better than that. So let's do it. So,
well, Michael, you were kind enough to send over Tom Stephen when he wrote his book, and it was amazing speaking with him and just hearing the stories that he had to tell. So, when these 2 other books come out that you're not naming, you know how to get a hold of us. Let us know who we need to chat with. And, we'd love, offline, I'll get in touch with you about how best to reach Nick. And as well as we really need to get Danko Jones on.
And Johnny Dovercourt wrote a great book called Any Night of the Week.
I got that book here somewhere, yeah.
Okay, great. And he is hosting the panel I'm doing on Saturday with Cadence Weapon at Harbourfront, 4:30 p.m., Toronto International Festival of Authors.
4:30 p.m. Greg, just take notes here. Harbourfront, Saturday.
Yeah. Great.
Michael, thank
Graham
you.
was
The
licking
book.
his pen, by the way. I just have to say, for the people at home that aren't watching on YouTube, he was licking his pen like
That's what you do.
Reporter from the 30s. Go ahead.
You got to clarify the weird audio that pops up in this.
Yeah. The book is Hearts on Fire, 6 years that changed Canadian music, 2000 to 2005. The author is Michael Barclay, published by our friends at ECW. Michael, we look forward to having you on again. This has been a blast. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, gentlemen.